is there a truly reality out there that humans could really know? It's an age-old battle between realists and absolutists. God is not great, how religion ruins everything. And yet it's utterly and totally ridiculous. We need to live for something beyond ourselves. For a while, I worked in a feeding program in downtown Baltimore, kind of a rough area. You know, it was a little sad because for years I would take my family, we would drive over this highway, and we drive over this highway and you come down and you make a right turn and you go into Baltimore Harbor, where there is the famous harbor with the shops and the stores and the aquarium and a big Barnes and Noble and big bookstores and Hard Rock Cafe. But you take that same road that I took for years, and instead of making a right turn, you make a left. I made a left, and it drove me right into the heart of American poverty. And I saw a few things in there that really just stayed in my mind, and that's a little bit of what I want to talk about today, some of the lessons I learned from that feeding program. You know, I remember one scene in particular. There was this old man, and his eyes were red. They looked like two raw sores. And I remember, you know, he took some bread. We go to these grocery stores and they have the stale bread or their bread that was expired, and they'd give it to us and we'd feed these poor people. And we gave this old man a thing of bread, and he started going, praise the Lord, praise the Lord. He said, I wanted bread this morning, and he said, but I didn't have any money, so all I can use was pancake batter. That's all I had. And he said, now this, he said, oh, thank you so much. And I remember thinking to myself, you know, here we are, you know, in America, almost 5 centuries since the first illegal immigrants to America, the Pilgrims, stole their first plot of land from the Indians in order to set a city on a hill in America. And now in the American city in the 21st century, this old man didn't have enough money to buy bread, so he had to, you know, bake some pancake batter instead. Whew, it freaked me out. You know, the writer F. Scott Fitzgerald, he began The Great Gatsby with a line, something to the effect of, let me tell you about the rich. They are different from you and me. It was something like that. Well, let me tell you about the poor. They're different from you and me. I mean, we walk into that city and you could see it in the way they walk and the clumsy way they carry their fat and the way they smile. I mean, they lived, it seemed, closer to the center of the earth. It's almost so gravity weighed harder on them than on the rest of us. I mean, the whole streets, there was like this foreboding, a harshness. It was almost as if life took hold there only after a great struggle. Anyway, we unload the bread, the pastry, the rolls, and they come dribbling out of their hovels and their homes, and they're always very polite and very thankful, and you know, they prefer white bread over whole wheat and bread over rolls, and sweets are very popular. The kids and the junkies, they love the sweets. And when things get rowdy, and every now and then they would get rowdy, it was never over the bread or the rolls, but it was always over the cookies and the cakes. They would fight over that. You know, I'll never forget, too, one time a man, he was about 30, and he was pale and cold. I mean, he looked like all his blood had been drained out of a hole and something synthetic had been, you know, put in his veins instead. He had a bag, and I filled it with bread, and I handed it to him, and I said, are you okay? And he just looked at me, white, just as white, and he says, no. And he said, just sort of this resignation, he says, you know, I have AIDS. The doctors tell me I'll be dead in a month. And he says, if I don't see you in this life, I'll see you in the next. And I remember we gave him the bag of bread, and just like a ghost with flesh and blood, and he just walked away. And I can remember, too, another guy about 19. I mean, he was so cross-eyed you'd get a headache looking at him. And he was pushing a baby carriage. And he had a little baby in the carriage, and he said that the kid had a heart or a stomach operation for something, I don't know what it was. And I asked about the mother, and he said the mother was gone. I don't think she was in the picture. And this guy, I said he looked like 19. He said he hated where he lived. He said, I get tired of the drug deals, and I get tired of the shooting. And then he told me he worked at a convenience store somewhere, one of the few who seemed to have a job. And I'll never forget, he pointed down the street toward the Baltimore Ravens football stadium. It rose out like a coliseum. And I remember he said to me, he said he had applied there for a job washing the stands. And I'll never forget him saying to me, he said, maybe, he said, one day I can be a supervisor of those who wash the stands at the Ravens stadium. And then it hit me. This is just one corner among miles and miles and miles of asphalt poverty and asphalt poverty. And this is just one city among hundreds. And this is just in the United States, the greatest economic power in history. And across the border, there are billions who would envy the affluence, of this kid whose great hope was to one day supervise those who wash the stadium. Couldn't believe it. And this is only the poverty. What about the prisoners? What about the refugees? What about the suicides? What about those who are famished, the insane, the lonely? What about the dying, the diseased, and the depressed? And this is just, you go on and on and on. I remember one of my favorite writers, I love his writing, is a German philosopher, Arthur Schopenhauer. Now, I don't agree with him on a lot, but he's a very good writer. I read a lot of Schopenhauer. And Schopenhauer was often called the philosopher of pessimism, the philosopher of doom. I mean, he definitely was kind of a morose kind of a guy. And in I think it was The World is Will and Idea, he wrote this famous line. He said, for where else did Dante get the material for hell if not from our real world? Got a point. And I like what Edna St. Vincent Millay, the poetess, once wrote. She said, Annie, eat your breakfast. Dan, take your medicine. Life must go on. I just forgot why. There among those loaves passing out, and especially in that old man's eyes, and in that old man's eyes, I saw more than ever why we as human beings, we need a hope. We need a hope beyond what this world offers. Because despite all good intentions, despite no matter how hard we try, no matter all the things that we try to do, the problems of the world are just too great for the world to solve. We haven't solved it. Things seem to be getting worse and worse and worse. And again, it just hit me. It just hit me as I walked through those streets those days and would see those people coming out, getting their food. We'd feed them a little here, then they'd go back. Then they'd come back. And again, this is just one city, one few corners in a whole world that is so much worse. And it just hit me how futile it is in this world alone. As human beings, we need hope. We need hope. We need hope that one day there'll be justice. We need hope that one day the wrongs are going to be made right. We need hope that somehow this is all going to be taken care of. But in the end, I saw more and more that if we don't have a hope beyond the world, if we don't have some kind of supernatural hope, if there isn't a God who at some point doesn't come, doesn't do something and make it right, then it's never going to be right. All there will be are wrongs. And more wrongs, and more wrongs, and more wrongs. All there'll be is more and more injustices, more and more unfairness, more and more young people dying before they should, more and more the criminals getting away with it, more and more. I mean, things aren't getting better. Things aren't getting, with all the vaunted hope of humanity. Oh, and a few things we improve. We keep people alive a little longer, keep them in misery a little longer, and then they still go. They still die. We do need a hope. We do need a hope beyond what we have here. And I believe that God is real. And I believe that the hope that God offers us is real. And in the end, that's ultimately the hope that I have to lean on, because I don't see it coming from anywhere else. If we are counting on ourselves, if we're counting on the politicians, if we're counting on the scientists, if we're counting on the UN or the army, then what real hope do we have? We need a hope beyond this world.